Good afternoon, everyone. I am Dr. Atiya Farooqi, and with me is Dr. Divya Hegde. We both are privileged to welcome you all to this function for the release of the book, The St. John's Toolkit for Medical Postgraduate Wellbeing. We're very honored to have with us here our chief guest, Dr. Pratima Murthy, Director of NIMHANS, to share with us the joy of release of this important book. I invite Dr. Pratima to kindly join us on the dais, please. Father Paul, our director, was unable to join us this afternoon due to a last-minute engagement. We regret his not being able to join us here. I invite the Associate Director of College, Father Charles Davis, to kindly join us on the dais, please. We're waiting for Associate Director Hospital and Associate Director Finance to join us for this function. As soon as they come in, they will be with us. Ma'am, please. I invite our beloved Dean, Dr. George D'Souza, to kindly join us on the dais, please. Invite Dr. Tony for joining us on the dais, please. Dr. Tony is the Dean of the St. John's Research Institute. Welcome, all of you.
Good afternoon, all. Now I call upon Dr. Suhal Chandran, Assistant Professor from the Department of Psychiatry, to give a brief introduction to the St. John's Toolkit for Medical Postgraduate Wellbeing.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you all for coming out today for this very important function and the release. So what I'm going to do is, I am Dr. Suhas. For those of you who don't know, I'm Dr. Suhas. I'm Assistant Professor in Child and Adolescent Psychiatry here. So I'm going to talk you through our journey through the book and why we came out with a book like this and why a second edition had to be made. Yeah. So just to give you a little bit of a background of the origins of the book. And at Johns, we do have a culture of well-being from a very long time, especially well-being for doctors and healthcare workers. So it started off in 2015, where we had the first Vice Dean of the PG program who was appointed. Several initiatives came out through this, including a PG forum where PGs could get together and have relevant discussions, relatable discussions. We had a PG newsletter to disseminate important resources. A PG policy document was also made for important academic and administrative issues. And during the COVID pandemic, especially, we did actively look at the healthcare workers, their well-being. We brought out several booklets, one called Breathe. We had pamphlets, posters in the ward, and we even ran a helpline locally for all healthcare workers. So the first edition of the toolkit was one such initiative from this particular forum, and that was released just before the first pandemic, the first wave of the pandemic on March 16th. So the idea behind the book is that overall across the country and especially in our institution, the number of PGs are increasing. If you put together senior residents as well as super specialty PGs, we have nearly 400 on campus. So what we wanted to do is, given our experience, find a way to share our collective well-being wisdom with all. And the idea for this first edition itself came about in discussion with several PGs. It was their felt needs, senior residents as well, and key people from the management and senior faculty as well, both present and past. The uniqueness of this book was that we were trying to create a very short book that definitely shouldn't be a textbook or a technical manual. We wanted to offer very practical and evidence-based strategies that the PGs could immediately implement at any point of time. We wanted an experiential perspective and a practical learning of the authors to come through. So we handpicked some of the authors. And to the best of our knowledge, when we did release it, this was the first book of its kind for PG well-being in the country. And we also were told that it was the first of its kind in Asia as well. So how did we come up with the second edition? There were, after the release of the first edition, requests from several other institutions across the country for copies. There were several suggestions that this book is not just useful for PGs here, but also for PGs across the country and other low middle income countries as well. So the process that we went about is, we did have 2 separate workshops. We involved PGs and faculties from different preclinical, paraclinical, clinical, and super specialty departments. We divided the chapters that were there in the first edition with each of them and asked them to critically review each. And several ideas actually emerged from this, which we conveyed to all the authors of the first edition for their revisions. So what then emerged eventually is 9 new chapters, apart from the ones that were already there. We also decided to retain the name St. John's Toolkit, though it was now going on a national basis. We had publishers this time for the second edition. Asian Trading Corporation, Bangalore, was the publishers for this. They have vast experience in the field, but this was their first book in the medical domain. We also unanimously decided with the management, publishers, and the authors that all the proceeds from the book will go into a junior doctor wellbeing fund. And the funds will be exclusively used for junior doctor wellbeing initiatives, especially for the junior doctors at St. John's. So the book overall comprises of 5 sections. The first one is Why This Toolkit. Second is Academics, Life in the Hospital, Beyond Academics, and Reflections. So these are the 5 chapters. In the first section of Why This Toolkit, we have messages from different national and international individuals. We also had a message from the Niti Aayog chairperson, Dr. Vinod Paul, who's also part of the board of governors of the NMC. We also got a message from ex-Director General, now ex-Director General ICMR, Dr. Balram Bhagava, giving one piece of advice for postgraduate well-being. In sections 2, 3, and 4, we had 34 short and very practical chapters. Overall, we had 51 authors from 26 different departments at Johns. 28 of these 34 chapters were co-authored between different departments. The content we tried to simplify and try to keep it as engaging as possible. We used bullet points and text boxes as much as possible. We used illustrations and icons to supplement this as well. And we also had simple take-home messages and suggested reading at the end of each chapter. All the chapters were cross-referenced. For example, if you had a chapter on boundaries at work, we would cross-reference it with ethics chapter as well. So as much as possible, it was cross-referenced. In section 2, 3, and 4, the technical chapters, under academics, these are the 8 chapters that were there. In section 3, which focused on the life of the PG in the hospital, we had totally 15 chapters. These are the first 8 and the remaining 7. In section 4, looked at general well-being measures, especially beyond academics, and these were the 11 chapters in that particular section. We also did something different compared to the first book. In section 5, we got reflections. So it started off with postgraduates' musings, which basically is that one piece of advice or message recent alumni or current postgraduates wanted to give to other postgraduates. So we had an entire section on that. We also got reflections from different faculty, both national and international. One is from Dr. Kishore, Arun Kishore, who says it's a book that all doctors should read, learn, and practice. Some of them may seem like common sense. However, having seen several doctors under severe stress, I realize this sense is not commonly applied. It sort of echoes some of the other messages that are there in this particular section and from different people who worked with these particular issues of well-being in PGs. So just final thoughts. What we try to do, and we hope that this particular effort will actually translate to healthier doctors, better patient care, healthier and happier communities and patients as well. We do realize it's going to go to nearly 602 medical colleges, and we hope that we'll be able to achieve this. We also hope in the process we are able to inspire institutions, policymakers, and teachers to overall broaden their scope of well-being strategies. We also realize this is only one way to take care of a PG's well-being. There are several others. And we also realize that a book alone will not be enough, might not be enough. So we're going to supplement this with junior doctor well-being workshops, which my co-editor, Dr. Dennis, will now talk to you about. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Suhas, for that introduction. It's indeed a unique book. So I welcome Dr. Dennis Xavier to talk about junior wellness, doctors' wellness workshop.
Thank you and good afternoon, everyone. So as Dr. Suhas just mentioned, just a book alone is not going to really serve the purpose. And we also need to go not just broader, but also we need to do something quickly is what we feel. So what's the need for the workshop? A book alone would have limited impact, as we said. A workshop, however, we believe will complement the toolkit or the book that we have. It'll have a synergistic effect, is what we believe. It'll also help to collaborate, to build collaborations and foster friendships among people who want to come together and work for junior doctors' well-being. So what are the objectives of the proposed workshops? To provide different junior doctors. By this, we start with interns, postgraduate students, and senior residents as well. Different well-being initiatives that are locally feasible and potentially effective. To also enable the creation of a platform for junior doctor well-being initiatives in the institute as well as in nearby areas. So clearly, we will start at St. John's, and we'd like to go to other parts of the country as well. So the motto of the workshop is pretty simple: healthier doctors, healthier societies. So prior to the workshop, clearly we will develop different modules. They'll be co-developed by faculty from both our institution as well as other institutes in India. And certainly we're going to knock our neighbors institute very soon. And in terms of the duration of the workshop, we thought we'll have one full day's workshop on day one, and on day two, about half a day's time that we would spend. The methods we'd follow is, I don't think at this workshop we're going to give them didactic lectures. It'll be participatory and it'll involve icebreakers, small group activities, different exercises, and other reflective activities. The strategies for their well-being will be evolved by the participants themselves. How best can we cope, and how can the institution and the environment around us help? So this toolkit or this booklet that we have will help as a manual. So maybe if there's a particular issue related to, let's say, mental health, okay, we open up chapter X and then we see, okay, what's written in this? Is this going to be useful for us? So we'll not follow it. We'll go backwards and refer to the manual as such. All sessions will only be in person and no recordings will be made, because we believe that people are likely to share a few sensitive things there. Right, costs of this workshop. We request or we'll appeal to the host institution to provide the workshop venue at no cost, but the junior doctors will pay a modest fee to cover their meals and any incidentals, maybe in the range of 500 rupees per person. The technical content will have three broad areas. One is on self, which will cover relationship, mental health, time, finance, mentorship, social media, etc. And then the work environment, which is academics, research, conferences, violence, night duties, etc. And family and friends, and how to keep in touch with your family, how to engage with them, peer support, family support, etc. Resource people for this, one or two, we'll start off from St. John's, and then for these workshops outside of here, we'll have people from other institutions as well. Of, let's say, 5 faculty, we'll have 1 or 2 would be a psychiatrist or a sociologist, but also we'll have non-psychiatrists and other people from other backgrounds to give a broader scope to this. So 1 to 2 faculty for the first workshop will travel to the next workshop, and the rest of the faculty will be different. So this way we'll enable capacity building and training and facilitating workshops in the future. We'll have a dinner meeting that will be organized and supported by the host institution on day 1 of the workshop. And at this time, we will invite institutions in the region, in the city. We'll include the heads of institutions, key management, faculty, and other junior doctor representatives. The objectives of the dinner meeting would be to provide feedback to the key institution members of day one. This is what came up, and to decide how best to execute the ideas that are generated at the workshop, and more importantly, to help create a well-being forum for junior doctors at the host institution and nearby. The outcomes, we hope, is going to be a greater investment by all stakeholders into junior doctor well-being, to also have healthier and happier junior doctors, which will translate to happier and healthier societies. And at this point, I must acknowledge the idea for these workshops were given by our publisher, Mr. Nigel Fernandez, who is there. So when he came for our workshop here, when we're revising this book, he said, in addition to this book, we should go around and share the contents of the book and have workshops. So we acknowledge and we are grateful to you, Mr. Nigel, for that. Right. So healthier, happier societies is what we hope. So thank you very much for your patient hearing.
Thank you, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my honor to invite our esteemed chief guest, Dr. Pratima Murthy, Director in hand, to release the book and then address the gathering.
You all need to come together. Sure.
Now I request our esteemed chief guest to address the gathering.
Dr. George D'Souza, the Dean of St. John's Medical College, Father Charles, Reverend Father Charles, Reverend Father Tony. A lot of familiar faces I see in this auditorium, and friends. It's very exciting to be here today. I always believe that this is a very intimidating auditorium. I don't know why, but I was actually hoping it would be in the other auditorium. I think it's about the seating that occurs here. It's kind of at very, very high levels. You've got to strain your neck to see the people on the top. But let me say, it's very exciting to actually come to a program which really looks at the well-being of junior doctors. I actually think all of us need such information as well as training workshops, because I think the older you get, the more responsibilities you have. So maybe they should do one for senior management in organizations next. Coming back to the fact of junior doctors, let me just give you a few thoughts on the importance of these initiatives. And I'm sure all of you will really understand that COVID really presented to us the major difficulties. It's not that we were not aware of these difficulties, but I think COVID really thrust these problems in front of us. I have Matthew here in the audience, who has been head of the Department of Psychiatry well before me. But I always think that being head of the Department of Psychiatry was a much more challenging job, because the 2 years that I was HOD was during the COVID pandemic. I have possibly never been so busy, in my life as I was then. In fact, now perhaps I receive less calls compared to those 2 years, when I used to practically receive calls till midnight with some or the other problem, and sometimes get woken up. And while some of these were problems related to patients, many of these were related to the difficulties that a lot of the postgraduates were actually having. Some of it were related to clinical work, what kind of steps they need to take, the support they needed to make those decisions. But some of it was also related to tremendous personal distress. And at that point in time, I realized how little we think about the background of our postgraduates, of our junior doctors. A lot of it, for example, was worry about their families. In fact, I think that was the overwhelming theme and the cause of stress among many of the postgraduates, because their families were very far away. They didn't know what was happening. They couldn't take the leaves that they might otherwise have taken. They had to encounter death amongst their family members. And of course, there was the personal anxiety. And I'm sure all of you are very familiar with that. It seems like a long time ago, but I remember the kind of stress there used to be about masks, about their PPEs, about which one was better than the other, usually which one was worse than the other. And then, and they do so much reading around this that they come up with all kinds of, issues as far as the PPE was concerned. So that was a huge source of stress. I think the other source of stress was isolation, because, there were so many restrictions. Normally, I think the best time in life is the postgraduate period, where you can kind of, really socialize and do a lot of things together. And that was prevented. And that was another source of great stress. The other thing, of course, I think was food. And again, one realizes how important things like, basic necessities like food and water are. And again, when you're confined in a hostel with little, chance of going out, no Swiggy and Dunzo to deliver to your doorstep, I think that is something that makes things very, very stressful for PGs. So you realize there were a lot of areas where, which we don't really normally pay attention to. Of course, I think perhaps we do. All of us as postgraduate teachers, I'm sure, make an effort to make the postgraduate course as less stressful as possible, as challenging as possible, as exciting as possible. So, but of course, I was reading a review that was actually done by one of our own postgraduates who was a senior resident subsequently, and he's published it last year. And I think they did an online survey of, postgraduate students, and they got responses from about 300 and odd students across the country. And they reported extremely high levels of stress. To the tune of more than 60% of the people who were actually, gave their responses, subjectively reported stress. A significant number of them reported feeling burnt out. So I think these are really things that, need us to wake up to the fact that perhaps we should not take our junior doctors for granted, should really understand that, they might be going through a lot of things related to their academics, but equally related to their physical health, to their social well-being, to their emotional states as well. So that becomes very important. So a book like this is extremely timely to address many of those issues. For almost 2 decades, I was involved with the International Labour Organization. And one of the things, of course, that the ILO is very famous for is looking for workplace wellness. Although it's not in the context of medical graduates, it's not in the context of junior doctors, I think all workplaces share some, very common characteristics. So normally what workplaces do are only look at evident problems. So then that's what I do too. I think we all do that. So when there is a problem, we address it. So we are reactive in our approach. What the ILO suggests is to shift from a reactive approach to a proactive approach. So, in terms of preparedness. And what it suggests is that people rarely leave their troubles at the factory gates, which basically means looking at the way we are in an ecological sense, that, no individual is kind of in a vacuum when they come to work. If they have troubles in their family, they bring it to the workplace. If there are problems at the workplace, it's transmitted to the family. So understanding that in an ecological context is very important. Another very simple way that the ILO visualizes issues are in the form of a traffic light. And that I thought is very, very useful to kind of apply to any aspect of problems that we might encounter in workplaces. So it simply looks at classifying people into green, amber, and red zones. The green zones are people who are healthy, and you might think of them as being not just physically healthy, but also in sound, positive mental health, or at least in a sound state of mental health, not disturbed. The amber zone is people who are having some kind of psychological distress that might be temporary to their situation. They might have had a loss of a relationship, and that's very, very common in that age group of young people, difficulties in relationships, breakup, new relationships, all of which, can cause stress. And then, of course, there is the red zone of people who have manifest difficulties, maybe a diagnosable mental health problem. And we do know that depression and anxiety are two very, very common problems, in this group of people. And it's not just doctors. Dental postgraduates also, I've interacted with many of them, and all of them share very, very similar kind of problems as far as these issues go. So the whole approach of the ILO is to keep the greens green. And I was very excited when I came into John's. I believe you're having a festival now. You're having a cultural program. So it was lovely to see the basketball field, full of people, so many other activities going on. So I guess that's part of the keeping the greens green approach, where you have a lot of activities, not just making academics exciting and interesting for people. I always talk about the approach that you have in terms of integrated learning. I've been to programs here, for example, I work in the area of addiction. So, your biochemistry department will organize something on the different elements of addiction, bring together the pharmacologists, the biochemists, the clinicians, the neurologists, and really have a good integrated approach, having quizzes. These are all nice ways of kind of, keeping the greens green. And of course, having enough extracurricular activities. Again, something that your institution should be proud of, that you have a lot of these things where you enable students to participate in it. But of course, I think it requires a certain amount of extroversion to be able to come forward and participate in this. So there will always be people who don't have the motivation or indeed the joie de vivre or the confidence to kind of come out and participate. So I think having some programs which tries and engages people becomes very important. And for the amber zone, again, during COVID, there's been a lot of work on having buddy systems at work. Because you can't really have programs like what we're discussing that reaches everybody. So really having somebody watch your back, having somebody concerned about you is also very critical. The other thing is that people rarely volunteer to come for help. Whether it's the stigma around accepting that you have a problem, whether it's this belief that a headache is okay to talk about, but feeling sad or anxious is not. I think these are a lot of mindsets in our own communities that make it very difficult for people to talk about it. I remember a couple of years ago in Koramangala, we had this very nice discussion with a lot of young people on talking about feeling suicidal. And that to me was an eye-opener. Till then, I didn't realize how much young people wanted to talk about how they felt, how helpless and hopeless they felt, on the fact that they'd had suicidal ideations, had even made a couple of attempts in the past, and how they had overcome it. To me, that was a great learning that the more open you are about these topics, the more likely people are likely to overcome their inhibitions and to talk about it. There are always fears that talking about these things actually cause problems. But research has shown that that's not the case, that talking about these things encourages people not to feel inhibited about reaching out and getting help. Red zone strategies, of course, are making some help available, people knowing where they need to go, how they can access help, but that needs to be done in a confidential manner. And that again poses a lot of challenges, particularly when the demands of the junior doctor are not met. So that is one of the very, very critical things on how do you, use confidentiality. I think the tennis partner deals with this issue very sensitively for those who, who might have read it, because, there's a person who has the substance use problem. So, when do you report? What do you do in terms of monitoring this individual? Because you have to make sure that the person is in follow-up. And believe you me, we face these conundrums time and again in the place of my work. I can tell you the anxiety when I have a junior doctor who's working in a neonatal unit who has an opioid dependence problem. Should I report this person? Should I treat them confidentially? How do I ensure that they take their buprenorphine substitution therapy? If this person makes any errors, drops out of treatment, what do I do? These are some of the difficulties that we face when people are there in the red zone. So I think it becomes important for institutions to think about it. I hope I'm wrong. I don't think any institution has fairly clear-cut mechanisms of how to deal with all these three. I think we do it more intuitively rather than in an organized fashion. And that's why this kind of focused attention on the various aspects of how junior doctors need to attend to various aspects of their professional as well as personal lives becomes so critical. So it's very heartening to realize that you've already expanded the number of chapters that were there earlier. So, that in the course of 7 years, I think 2015, you said was the first one. 20? The first one was in 2020. Oh, wow. That's just in 2 years, you've kind of rethought the whole thing and expanded all the chapters. Now, having these workshops, I think that's again a very interesting thing. So I was involved with something called the ILO Solve, which looks at stress, violence at the workplace, the use of alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs, sexual risk, and so on. The whole idea is that every organization will have newer and newer problems as you go along. As your workforce expands, as the nature of your work becomes more complex, as relationships become more complex, as society becomes more complex, the branches will all keep changing. But the soil in which the organization is rooted, the values of the organization, the policies of the organization, the commitment of the organization to its employee well-being, a sense of teamwork, a sense of feeling that you belong. These are all important aspects of the soil. So whether it's COVID time, whether it's 2020 now, whether it's 10 years later, these organizational values become very important. And of course, you have to deal with all the individual problems that come up. So I won't be surprised if it's in another couple of years, you will think of more and more topics to kind of add. And what the ILO Solve does is that it uses case scenarios and helps people discuss around these case vignettes or case scenarios, how they would deal with the problem. So in some ways, it's not just that you're teaching well-being to the participants, you're also training them to be empathetic, to kind of improve their administrative skills and sensitivities so that they're not just learning their academics, but also learning how they can be future empathetic, compassionate leaders. And some of these conundrums that I spoke about are things that we possibly all need to, learn how to handle and anticipate that will happen in our own, teams that we work with, in the units or in the departments that we work with. So I think these are very important win-win situations where all of us can come together and really learn how to make, first of all, our institutions a better place and perhaps the world a better place. I think I do know that stress has become a generational thing now. You go to any place, everybody tells you, the young people particularly talk about the stress that they're facing. So I think it's also about, as a society, as an organization, improving resilience, improving support for each other, mutual support for each other, and of course, making people feel valued. I think that's something as a society that we need to constantly do, because the standard thing that all 10 fingers are not alike. So we respect people for their strengths, help them to overcome their deficiencies, help them to be good. Of course, as professionals, you've got to be good in your profession, but even decision-making, mentoring, to decide what our young junior doctor is going to become in future, being able to recognize them is very important. I saw that Dr. Mohan Isaac has given the foreword for this edition as well. And I'm very proud to say that Dr. Mohan Isaac has been a mentor, for a very, very long time. I was a student, I worked in his unit as a young consultant, and in spite of moving away, we keep in touch so that, I think there's so many experiences that you can validate with your mentors. And I think that's a very, very important relationship. So whether you have a formal mentoring program or you have a notion of mentoring, of taking on a mentee or being mentored, I think those are all debatable. But the issue is that if there is somebody who works as a role model for you, as somebody who works as a sounding box for you, as somebody who works as an advisor, so you might have a peer mentor whom you can, sound off and, kind of ventilate with. You might have a faculty mentor whom you might discuss your dreams, aspirations, and your disappointments with. So having people like this in the organization is also critical. Of course, one can go on and on about this, but I'm going to stop with complimenting the team at St. John's for actually bringing this, thing together, and for the plans that you've put into place in the future. I'd like to congratulate the management of St. John's for taking this very seriously and for encouraging the young faculty to bring up something like this. I'm sure it will pay off very rich dividends. And most importantly, I think it will inspire other organizations to take up similar programs. Whatever you need in terms of support, you already have enough of that in-house. But if you do need anything specific, and I'm sure colleagues at NIMHANS and myself would be very happy to work with you and take this forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am, for that inspiring message. Now I call upon Dr. George D'Souza, our beloved dean, to hand over the class to our chief guest. In order to recognize the efforts that have gone into this book, we would like to hand over a plaque. First to Mr. Nigel Fernandez. I request Dr. Pratima kindly hand over the plaque. Mr. Nigel Fernandez is the CEO of ABC Publishers.
Congratulations on that very nice finisher.
Invite the authors, Dr. Dennis Xavier, to please come on the editors, Dr. Dennis Xavier and Dr. Suhan. Dr. Suhan, please. And Dr. Dennis Xavier. There have been endless number of hours and countless sleepless nights at their efforts to bring this book together. So now we move on to the next part of the program, that is the panel discussion. So I request Dr. Pratima Murthy and Dr. George D'Souza to stay back on the dais. And I thank Dr. Tony and Father Charles for joining us on the dais. Please be in the audience and please help us with the panel discussion. I invite Dr. Arvind Kasturi, Chief of Medical Services, to kindly come on stage and introduce the rest of our panelists and take over the panel discussion from here.
Yes, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this segment of the program where we have a very interesting panel discussion on junior doctor well-being. As I call upon and acknowledge our panelists, let's invite them and welcome them to the dais with a round of applause. We already have Dr. Pratima Murthy, Director of NIMHANS, Professor and Head of the past Head of the Department of Psychiatry. Ma'am, we welcome you to this panel discussion. My pleasure to invite arguably the most important person in the room, Dr. Shruti, postgraduate student in anesthesia. Please come forward. Our youngest panelist, Dr. Ratnam Chaudhary, ma'am, the professor and head of the Department of Medicine, arguably one of the most busy departments we have in the hospital. Welcome, Dr. Ratnam. Dr. Ashlesha Bagadia. Yes, ma'am. Dr. Ashlesha Bagadia is a perinatal psychiatrist working with the Green Oak Initiative in Bangalore. She ran a helpline for well-being of doctors during the COVID pandemic. She has a large clientele of doctors and healthcare workers. Ma'am, very, very special welcome to you onto our panel. And of course, Dr. George D'Souza, Professor of Pulmonology, good friend and Dean of St. John's Medical College. So, this is how we will go about this panel discussion. Thank you, panelists, for being here. I echo, in fact, Dr. Pratima Murthy's sentiments, many of them, especially the one where she said that even I feel that there are some days when I am in desperate need of well-being, I echo that sentiment, sitting in the kind of chairs we sit now. Anyway, this is what we will do with our panel discussion. We have posted some questions to our panelists earlier on, and we have asked them to think about these questions. And we will call upon our panelists to answer those questions to all of us. We will give them about 5 minutes. Now, the secret to a good panel discussion is adherence to timing. And I will, therefore, with the permission of the panelists and the House, intervene if necessary to maintain that timing. But I request our panelists to kind of try to adhere to this 5-minute kind of allotment that we've given to them to address these questions which have already been shared with them. The questions will come up on the panel that you see in front of you. And for the panelists, the questions will be up here as well. Therefore, without any further ado, I think we'll plunge into the panel discussion itself. So, after the 5 panelists have had their 5 minutes here answering the questions that were put up to them, we will then invite the audience, you, to ask any other questions you might have, other things that you might want to ask the panelists. And here I am requesting the audience, and I will request you again when we start that segment to keep your question to a question and not an observation or a thought, which we can, of course, discuss over what I hope follows will be tea, right? So that is the structure of the panel discussion this afternoon. With that, I think we are ready to go ahead. Can we have the first set of questions? Now, our first panelist is Dr. Pratima Murthy. Yes. Thank you. Right, here we've got a slide changer. Yes, this is the question that we put to Dr. Murthy, which is this. The NMC recently spoke about well-being issues for junior doctors. So it's not just us who's speaking about it, but if I had a hat, I would doff it. The NMC has recently spoken about well-being issues for junior doctors. And our question to her is this: what are national level policies which you might be aware of, ma'am, for junior doctor well-being, both existing and planned? That's one question. And the second question, which you might see coming up with some of the other panelists as well, but this is her perspective on this, which is what can institutions do, institutions like hers, institutions like ours, do right away for the well-being of their junior doctors? These are 2 questions which we put to Dr. Pratima Murthy, and her time starts now.
initiative for finalists.
Oh, lovely. We welcome that. Thank you.
August that NMC actually issued a directive to all the heads of institutions saying that they are concerned about the well-being of junior doctors and that all institutions should do something about it. One of the issues, of course, is something that is universal in terms of the working hours of doctors. So I think that's something that we all know sometimes, and we've been there, done that. We survived, but I think all over the world, there has been a concern about not doing, back-to-back duties, not, having not more than 8 hours of duty. But these are all things that have been concerns all over the world. I think NMC has taken a note of certainly of the duration of working. They talked about the work conditions. They also specifically said that stress management and counseling for doctors needs to be arranged. Now, these are possibly intuitive that these things need to be done. But the issue is, how do you set it in motion in an organization? How do you make sure? And that possibly needs to occur at the department level. With the Indian Medical Association, we again thought we should have a program called Doctors for Doctors, where we need to develop a support mechanism for junior doctors, in addition to looking at the workplace-related factors, which are all about, the work safety, the duration of working hours, sleep hygiene, etc. To looking at also trying to mitigate any causes of stress amongst these doctors. But now we've actually been in talks with the IMA in Delhi to initiate something at the national level so that all colleges can have a cell which looks at, junior doctors' well-being and have this kind of promotive as well as preventive aspects of, helping them to deal with the various stresses. I just hope that takes off. In terms of what institutions can do, I think one of the important things that institutions can do is really have a students' wellness program, and I think that's very useful. So that's something that the Dean at NIMHANS have actually started, where they've gotten a few of the postgraduates to come together to have a series of programs. And this is especially important because as people advance in postgraduation, they become more and more isolated. We have clinical postgraduates, we have postgraduates in basic sciences, behavioral sciences, neurosciences, and all of them have different kind of work profiles. So trying to get them to come together, it might be a poetry reading, it might be physical activity, it might be a cultural program, trying to do some of those things. The second thing is at the department level, encouraging confidential counseling. That's another thing that we try to get department heads to do, so that they can kind of address early problems amongst their postgraduates. The third thing, and that's a tough one that we're dealing with for people who have diagnosable, mental health conditions, of trying to get them to go outside of the institution so that confidentiality can be maintained. We've been toying with the idea of having, senior retired professionals to come in to the institution to provide, support to our students, but we're again concerned about confidentiality related issues. Now, when we're also planning what is called NHS for our students, the United HC, which is usually open to permanent faculty. We're trying to get that to the students as well, so that they get, prompt medical care should they need it. So these are some of the things that I think about. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you very much for those insightful observations. Very nice to know that the NMC is seized with this issue of well-being among our junior doctors. Working hours, conditions, department level initiatives are very, very welcome indeed. And very nice to know about the NIMHANS Health Service, ma'am, and the fact that you are planning to open it to students as well. And the student wellness program, I guess, something on the lines of what is being planned by what Dr. Dennis and Suhas spoke about as well. Thank you very much for that. We move on to our next panelist, Dr. Shruti. Yes, now Dr. Shruti, who's a postgraduate student in anesthesia, these are the questions that we put to her. What are the key challenges, Shruti, that you think exist for junior doctor well-being? How are junior doctors like you currently coping with these challenges? And what can institutions do from your perspective? Now, we heard the perspective of the director of NIMHANS, but as a postgraduate student yourself, what do you think are some of the things that can be done to improve junior doctor well-being? These are our students for Shruti. Our questions for Shruti, sorry. Yes, Shruti, all yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to right away start off with the first question. What are the key challenges that we are facing as junior doctors? I would like to categorize this three topics, and somewhere it was mentioned in Dr. Dennis's slide as well. Work, self, and family. So, starting with work, we all are well aware that junior doctors work very long hours on minimal sleep and having infrequent and unhealthy meals, which in turn results in poor health and fatigue and frequent illnesses. And this does not extend to just the clinical PGs who are working in the hospitals, but also our pre and paraclinical counterparts who spend long hours in the labs and long hours use their laptop screens, working on advanced research projects and contributing immensely to the academic programs of the undergraduate students. But medical students, people who get into the line of medicine, in general, most of them are workaholics and they wouldn't mind these long hours as long as the environment that you're working in was a pleasant one. And sometimes, unfortunately, that is not the case. We do have, say, senior PGs who sometimes forget that they were in our shoes just a few months back. And there are also junior PGs who sometimes ignore the fact that if they slack off, that responsibility falls on already overburdened final residents. And keeping all of this in mind, there is very much time to meet our academic requirements, and we have to finish our thesis and study and do our posters and publications. And leaving all this aside is very little time for full time. Even if we were supposed to get a go for social gatherings to meet people, you're too exhausted to actually turn up. So these, I would say, are the key challenges related to work. But then coming to self, we are well aware that most PG students, we all suffer with feelings of inadequacy, of imposter syndrome. Why am I here? How have I gotten this far? And feelings of anxiety and fear. And also the very unhealthy competitiveness that also seem to have with our peers. Keep publishing a paper. Why am I not doing the same thing? And lastly, coming to our families, most of us live far away from home, the feelings of isolation, the feelings of missing out on key family events. And lastly, keeping in mind those colleagues of mine who are newly starting families, who have newly assumed the responsibilities of running a household and managing new babies and their aging parents. So doing all of this and managing work is definitely an impressive task that we still like to underappreciate. So these I would share the challenges that we are facing. Coming to how do we cope with these challenges? So there are unhealthy, there are healthy coping mechanisms. A lot of us tend to suppress our emotions. I give myself mental pep talks, just another year, another few months, and I will get through this. We do approach our seniors, our mentors, our HOD, the faculty, if there is some conflict resolution, just advice in general, and more often than not, the doors are open for us. If someone like me call my mom, have a little cry, there's always a lot of sympathy and appreciation and love on the other end of that phone call. And lastly, something that a lot of us tend to do, if you find little free time, you choose to do the other thing, find little time to read a book or get into a little music, find a source of distraction or happiness to fill yourself up. Of course, there are unhealthy coping mechanisms, drowning yourself in a bucket of ice cream when you're feeling low, binge watch Netflix. And lastly, there have been spurts of emotional outbursts where you take out your frustrations on an unsuspecting junior, on a stranger on the other end of the phone call, or some ward nurse. And those are things that tend to happen more often than not. And lastly, what can the institution do to improve the junior doctor well-being? So I think one thing that we should work on as a medical fraternity in India as a whole is to stop normalizing overworking a junior doctor. We postgraduate students tend to work 80 to 100 hours a week, sometimes 30 to 40 hour shifts continuously on minimal sleep. And these are past all labor laws and we raise eyebrows in the West. But a standard response that you get from your senior PG to the senior most faculty when you say whether this is fair is a recollection of all the suffering that they have faced as a postgraduate student. And we are probably the only profession in the world that takes so much pride in suffering. It was not okay then, it is not okay now, and we need to work towards improving that attitude. Coming to at the institute level, we are well at the St. John's, we are reasonably well taken care of postgraduate students, but that is not always the case in most other institutes. Starting from the provision of basic facilities, good hostel rooms, clean drinking water, and 24-hour supply of bath water when you get back after a very long day, and meals, a dietary that accommodates the crazy hours of postgraduate students, or it's not just a cafeteria that has a 24-hour facility, a coffee that's available in the night. These simple things would make a very big difference. And lastly, clean and safe duty rooms when you get those few hours to take a nap during duty days. Coming to the institute level, a couple of points I have thought about is a mandated 1 day off a week. In the sense that some days you work 2 Sundays, that's 21 days consecutively of work. And I think if the institute were to ensure that even if you are doing a Sunday, you get at least 1 day off a week. And this is not for you to go out and to meet people, but you need those 24 hours to finish your laundry, finish your thesis, clean your room, just get 8 hours of solid sleep. And I think that's very important. Also, the institute should encourage PGs to come forward in a safe space to express issues without the fear of retribution, without the fear of being ostracized from your department or the fear of failing your exams. And a few more points I want to make is that the institute should, as Nan was saying, should encourage counseling sessions. And lastly, as Sir was mentioning, these PG forums, it would be a good idea to restart them. And I'm proud to say that as a part of the PG Student Council, we are working forward to PG initiatives in the next couple of months. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Very, very well said. I think it's difficult to encapsulate all that she said in the amount of time she took to say it. But she's done a wonderful job. Like every good postgraduate, she started off by classifying. When in doubt, classify. Very good. Shruti, thank you for that. Work, self, family, coping, and a few prescriptions for St. John's to look after our own junior doctors. The associate director is here. The dean is here. I am here. Yes, well, I don't know how much pride we take in suffering, so to speak. But yes, whatever. Points well taken, Shruti. Thank you for that. Okay, let's move on to our next panelist, ladies and gentlemen. Dr. Ratnam Chaudhary is the head of the Department of Medicine. And the question for Dr. Ratnam is this. You, ma'am, are the head of the department with the largest number of junior doctors. I mean, your postgraduate intake is high, we know that. And at a department level, in your view, what can be done to enhance your own junior doctor well-being? Because department level was something that even Dr. Murthy mentioned as being something that the NMC also says we should do at our department levels. So at your department level, what do you think can be done to enhance junior doctor well-being? Yes, ma'am.
Let me start off with saying what we are actually already doing in our department. Then I'll go on to how we can improve the PG wellness. So as medicine department, the last department, now we are handling 30 postgraduate students. And in a couple of months, maybe we'll have 45 with the fresh batch joining. So we, being a clinical department, we do work with them very closely in the wards, in the OPDs, during their teaching programs, during their research. So we, all faculty members, have actually identified students who need physical support for their physical well-being as well as their mental well-being. What we do is we identify a postgraduate who has some form of mental, some form of maybe distress, psychological distress, or some stress, or even maybe we have identified that it could be a mental illness. We first call them and have a discussion one-to-one. Most of the times, with some counseling and support, we are able to sort out their problems and they carry on well. If we find that the problem is deeper, then we go back to our student counselor, call them, and the student is called, and the counselor does have sessions, sometimes single, sometimes multiple, wherein he or he will get in touch with the physician, that one of us, and even family members are informed. And there are occasions when we have taken our postgraduate students to consult one of our colleagues from the psychiatry department so as to find out what is actually ailing them. And that has actually been proven very successful in many cases. That's what we are doing. Yes, now let me tell what we actually can do. So we don't really have anything in place to take care of their physical well-being. So there are times when our postgraduate students have working hours, continuous working hours in the wards that's up to even 60 hours continuous. So what we plan to do is maybe after the 60 hours of work, we give them a day off so that they go back, unwind themselves and come back rejuvenated. This is one thought that we are planning to implement. Secondly, even while on their duty day, when they are working almost more than 24 hours at a stretch, when we do rounds, we get time for our breaks. So we should ensure that even our postgraduates get time off for their meals, to freshen up, get their adequate breaks and come back and continue the work overnight. And regarding taking care of their mental health first, in a better way, what we can do is we feel that they may open up better to the junior faculty considering the less age gap. So we plan to maybe engage our junior faculty and give 2 to 3 students to each of them so they can have regular meetings with them, catch up with them, find out how they are faring, their physical health, their mental health, emotional health, and they may open up to the junior faculty and then we can help them better. Another thing that has struck us over the years is we should be watchful about bullying that can happen between the batches of postgraduates. And we did pick up a few bullying incidents. Bullying in the sense it could be just a verbal abuse to a poor performer, or trying to say that you have not got a very good rank, so this is how you perform. So this sort of verbal abuse or even overworking, making the senior PG trying to not really run away from work, but trying to make the other person do an extra bit of work because he or she wants some time off. As Shruti rightly said, they forgot that they were in the same situation a year back or 2 years back. Bullying or even undermining their work. So all this we should be watchful and we are watchful. So I think that's what I would like to convey.
Wonderful. That was Dr. Ratnam, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, ma'am. I think the one-on-one and the support that senior staff can give to a younger doctor is probably the most valuable thing that one can actually impart. Giving them a day off. I mean, it's obvious that this audience doesn't have too many junior doctors. That's the kind of statement where people will vociferously clap and say, yay, and all that. So giving them a day off is in line with what Shruti said. And this phenomenon of a senior kind of bullying a junior, I'm glad that you brought it out in case that is a phenomenon that all of us should be careful about in our departments. I think it's worth bringing on the table and being aware of it. Thank you for those insights. Right, let's move on to our next panelist. Welcome, ma'am, again to Dr. Ashlesha Bagadia, who's a consultant psychiatrist. So, ma'am, in your practice, we believe that you see a lot of doctors with wellness issues. And I'm sure you have a lot of experience in the kind of range of wellness issues that you hear about. And what is their health-seeking behavior and how can we improve their well-being? I mean, in your experience with the doctors that you've dealt with and the healthcare workers. Dr. Ashlesha Bagadia.
It's really, interesting and exciting for me to just even listen to all the panelists and this forum. Mainly because I'm hoping that whatever I've seen, a lot of it will change henceforth. I do see a lot of doctors, I do see a lot of medical students as well. One of the biggest thing is not so much the health seeking, but the lack of health seeking. And it is really, really difficult for them to for us all, I imagine, to even reach the space of recognizing that, okay, I'm going to go and consult a therapist, or I'm going to go and consult a psychiatrist. The first step itself, there seems to be a lot of barriers in recognizing, at what point should I go and consult someone. And now those barriers are various depending on where they're from, of course, culturally, but there are common themes that there's a huge stigma still attached to recognizing that I may have a mental health issue and to reaching a point of, oh, I need to go and speak to someone about it. So the stigma is probably more in the medical fraternity than it would be outside. And I think as a paradigm, we have seen a huge shift in the health seeking in the general public over the last few years. Mental health is being talked about. So I can see that shift also in the medical fraternity. And I think this, this initiative is a kind of a mark of that shift as well. One of the other issues that again comes up, not only is this stigma, how I will be perceived, what will people think of me, but also the lack of trust in the mental health system. And this is, I guess, for us, the mental health practitioners to take note. The mental health practitioners themselves, but also doctors of other specialty are not sure who should I go to. Should I go to a psychiatrist? Is that someone who's going to address my needs? I don't need medication. Even before they seek help, they're trying to fix the problem and figure out how can I resolve this without, needing to go to see someone. And if I do end up going, who can I see? Are they skilled enough? So I think that is one of the questions that always doctors are struggling with. Am I seeing the right person who may be able to address my needs? With great difficulty, I managed to recognize I need to seek help, and the trust in the system is lacking. It takes a long time. By the time they found a person that they can trust, they've already, struggled through a lot of their difficulties. I'm also glad a lot of institutional things came up, and I believe St. John's, is a leading institution and quite different compared to a lot of experiences I've heard from other doctors. Here we talked about, collaboration with the mental health faculty, the psychiatric faculty, and the general faculty. This is not there in many other institutions. And one of the common examples of complaints that doctors have is that they don't see the psychiatric doctors very often. They're not very well integrated. They're kind of, in their own world. So they don't know, the integration of the systems is not that much. In the wellness sector as well, I think by the time they come to me, many of them have already got, developed a diagnosable condition, or are, probably coming to me because they don't want to see someone in their institution and they may be in that wellness space. I also work with a lot of pregnant and postnatal population. So many doctors come because they want to now be proactive. But most of the time, the difficulties we have is that they're coming, as what Dr. Pratima Murthy said earlier, as a reactive, fixing the problem. And they might even take all that time to wait till it gets really bad, and then left with no choice, they're going to need help. But I think if there was more to be done, it's in the proactive phase, in the preventive space, right, where we can, and where we can actually look at how more well-being steps can be taken. I also wanted to talk about, just in terms of what was said for institutions. One of the biggest complaints, of course, I receive from doctors is their workplace. But I must tell you, by the time they reach the illness space, the work is something that they're doing on autopilot. Many of the times I ask, okay, the work stressful, can something be done? They're like, that's okay, I'm delivering bad news all the time. I'm okay with that. It's their personal life that they find a lot of stress from. But one thing that does stand out is that they often cite examples of a senior whom they have seen who cope well. So I think we are talking about junior doctor wellness, but I'm sure that the seniors and other faculty are also struggling. And I do see a lot of senior doctors as well. So the juniors are watching the seniors. The juniors are watching how the seniors are coping, and maybe they learn from them. So if someone, and I'm quite proud to say that I had therapy when I was doing my post-graduation. Maybe because I thought I was struggling with the kind of patients I was seeing. They were self-harming all the time. I didn't end up talking about my patients at all. I was talking about my personal life itself. So I think, and then when I tell that to my juniors, they feel a little bit more confident in now seeking help. So I think seniors, how you are coping might be helpful for your juniors to learn from as well. And just as a last note, I know we're talking about surviving, Dr. Pratima Murthy, you said that we went through a grueling medical training and we survived. I think we need to look beyond survival now. We need to look at how can we thrive. It's not enough just to survive. We need to thrive and move ahead as a community.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Shresha. In fact, some very interesting perspectives from what we heard from her. The lack of health seeking. I mean, I don't know how much we teach our medical students to seek help and when it is required. So I think that that's a gap perhaps in the curriculum of the medical system itself. And I'm glad she brought it out. And also glad to hear about the paradigm shift where people are seeking care a little more easily than they were doing earlier. And looking for the right person. I see that that's a thing which continues in life as we go on. And of course, role modeling. I think that continues even in this space. Very interesting perspective indeed to say that I will learn how to cope depending on how I'm seeing a senior or somebody else whom I look up to cope himself or herself. So thank you for that, ma'am. Really nice to hear these perspectives. So our last panelist for today is Dr. George D'Souza, our Dean, Professor of Pulmonology, and these are the questions we put him. We asked him, how are faculty currently handling the well-being challenges faced by their junior doctors? And what can we do as faculty to improve? And at an institutional level, again, but from his perspective, what can be done to enhance junior doctor well-being? So these are the questions for you, Dr. George. Go ahead.
Thank you. From the faculty point of view, one of the things that we, last year or so we are looking at is whether we can develop, as Dr. Pratima said, mentoring program for our students. Because postgraduate, we have a mentoring program for undergraduates. There's a very, what we think, a successful mentoring program that happens with in the Department of Psychiatry, and we have showcased with all the other departments to try and incorporate it in their department. Usually, what happens is there's a relationship between the resident and the guide, and that's an informal mentoring program. But we didn't know whether that was a good thing, because it could be good or it could be bad, because the relationship is very uneven. So we were wondering whether it should be another faculty or whether it should be another faculty who is not in the same department. So that's one thing that we are looking at, and hopefully we will be able to put it in as to how the faculty are handling. One of the things that we do is in both the undergraduate and the postgraduate in the induction program, we have a session where our student council makes a presentation, and we encourage students, both undergraduates and postgraduates, and then give the faculty also to make use of the student council. There has been not many, but a couple of occasions where the student councillors have had a one-to-one discussion with the students or with a group of students who are facing problems. The other thing that we've had is that one of the things that Shruti mentioned is hierarchy, and that's a hierarchy within the resident population itself. And we have had a few sessions with the senior teaching to try to make them understand that this is not the way that how to handle when a new postgraduate comes. So that is something that we did. And of course, going forward, we hope that this workshop that happens, the faculty will be also there. The other thing that we have done is because one of the big partners is music. And we've had a previous workshop for our faculty to give an understanding about how to go about the students. And we hope that that will help decrease the stress related to thesis in the residency program. What can we do at the institution level? Like already said, one of the things that was done was understanding that there is a need for to look at the government and residents was to appoint a vice dean, certified, and of course the pandemic was great, but we used to meet the postgraduates twice a year. We had committee, PG committee, the dean and the vice dean met with them, and I hope it was not an intimidating meeting, and they were able to express whatever they felt. Of course, with the proviso that we may not be able to address all the issues. But yes, I think we did try to tackle good. Fortunately, the youth canteen came and took care of that. We were in the process of that. We know there are problems with water accommodation. Wherever possible, we try to address it. Another issue that I think which was a problem was internet. Again, that was past cases. So we did have this, we do have this forum, but unfortunately, in the pandemic wasn't there. With the pandemic, we created a helpline to help the students. Wasn't used very effectively from what we did, but we did proactively right from the beginning when we got to understand that our resident population was very well. We did create a helpline. So that is something that happened. Then we also created, I think, a couple of, as part of the meeting, there used to be an informal cultural activity that used to happen. And then the PG committee, I think, at least once a year, they were called a picnic in the morning or in the evening. That was partly because what we found was, unlike undergraduate, postgraduates come from different institutions and for the first time to St. John's, and they don't know each other. So the groups are very small, they don't meet each other. So we did do all that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Dr. George. Thanks a lot. Those were some of the initiatives taken by St. John's to enhance the well-being of postgraduate students. Mentoring, especially for postgraduate students, is on the anvil. Faculty guides and sessions with senior PGs to discuss things about how they can get along with their juniors a little better. Okay, so with that, ladies and gentlemen, this segment is done. We've got, by that clock, it's now 4:20, which means we have about 10 to 15 minutes of the floor discussion. If any of you have a question which you'd like to pose to our panelists, we request you to do the following. Put the mic on in front of you. There's a small button there. I think the mics do work. Father, could you just put that on and just check to see? Yeah, in fact, it does come. So the mics do work. So please put the mic on in front of you. Say very briefly who you are, introduce yourself, and ask the question. It would be nice if you point the panelists to whom you're asking this question. It makes it easy for them to answer. So again, I'm requesting anybody who's asking a question to make it a question, and a simple, straightforward question which can be answered, and not an observation or a thought, which we will have over tea time. Yes, we've got the first question, Dr. Thelma Narayan. Yes, ma'am.
When we look at what are the causes of the stress that the people face, they are multiple, and it also includes the interaction with, say, patients and the community also. And there are instances of violence that sometimes the PT faces by the community, where that does happen and can be stressful. And also sometimes there are issues of like how to deal with patients not being able to pay and they are very unwell, and you have to deny them treatment because they cannot access they don't have the necessary amount to pay as a part of this plan, which can be very stressful for a PG. That is one thing, how does this treatment against? What is the problem?
Okay, so this is a question to Dr. George, is that right? Yeah, George. Two situations. Here's a violent patient And second, a patient who is not able to afford treatment, but still a young postgraduate wants to offer the best he or she can. How do they cope with these things in your experience, Dr. George?
I think the violence part of it, there's a mechanism that is created. So the security comes and things like that, and helps I don't think there's a foolproof situation against that. I think in the last couple of things, filing an FIR when before we were a little reluctant to file an FIR. So I don't know whether having filed an FIR has deterred, because sometimes it's irrational once we lose the school. I think part of the reason is that sometimes we lose the school and we get a harder because they're all extremely easy for it. It's not only care that is caused of them. So that is what as far as yes, there might be problems with respect to being able to pay and things like that. So we have mechanism that we refer the patient to the medical specialist. For example, in the emergency, I mean, taking care of immediately with the medical social worker. And then in the medical social worker thing that the intervention has been done, it might either go to the patient at the hospital or go to the payment, and they will take care of it wherever it's possible, or we'll find an alternative place to take care of the patient. So that is what the mechanism. But yes, you're right, 100% doesn't happen. And unfortunately,
Yeah, okay, thanks, George. Thank you. Just to add to what he said, I mean, I think your question was how the junior doctor copes with this mechanisms that we have in place. I think the fact that we have a mechanism, the code that we trigger for violence is code white. And we have a system doing that. And when a junior doctor feels that there is a system in place, there are people who rush to his or her help in a situation like that. I guess it equips them a little better to deal with it. And he's absolutely right with respect to payment. We've now got a system where the doctors are also involved in deciding concessions and reduction of bills. So by watching, by observing, by understanding systems, it's not just patient care, but there's also systems which are running in the hospital. Well, we hope they're running in the hospital. By watching things like that and learning also, I think, Thelma, I'm just adding to the question, to the answer that George gave. Yes, thank you. Any other questions?
Question from medicine.
Oh, yeah.
One of the issues which they have already brought up, and as you brought up, is that moving with long working hours is a big problem, and the fatigue that comes out with it, as Dr. Hafiz has now told us. And this issue has been flagged up and dealt with internationally. So from our institute, this is something we can do, and we have an action plan already.
Yeah.
I think it's for you to do. As a department, you have to plan out your resident policy. You don't think volume of the I've told this to everybody. There are certain departments where I think they do 24 hours and within 6 hours they come back to work. I also totally agree with that. But the other department that's the way to do that. I mean, you can tell the head of the department that it shouldn't be done. For example, your department, there are 45 people. I don't see any reason why you should be working 15 hours. So you need to plan out your work so that they get enough.
That was driven straight back to you. But I think the point is well taken. Point is well taken. HOD level and department level initiatives is the answer. Dr. Mallikarjun Swami had a question, after which Dr. Anita Bijur, and then at the back I see Nitin, who peeped in. I saw you peeping in and then went to the back. Yes.
Of course, we are all of the data. And because becoming a junior doctor, will need UGs, need for PGs, they'll do only contractors. Before joining to this course, whether you have a solution to any, whether a fitness to go for this particular course. Do you have any mentors for the rest of the day?
I don't know if I have any. Yeah, I'm not sure I have suggestions to make, but I can tell you how stressful right now, even the process of meetings. I think it's one of the most stressful things for students because there's so much uncertainty about the dates and how to go about it. Your question actually, tells me something that I mentioned. And that is how you kind of be with people. Now, a junior resident very often watches taking it as well. It just struck me that it's the similar thing happens between convicts and undergrads. It's a terrible, comparison. But convicts generally have learned when they were undergrads how other convicts used to treat them. And they move out the same treatment to the undergrads. So then when they become convicts, so I think a lot of it occurs by example. So I was actually struck by the fact of what you said, about the fact that we work very long hours. Now, it's not just the working of the long hours that's the issue. It is the context in which it is done. So, for example, whether you do 8 hours or 12 hours is not the issue. It is whether you can make mistakes when you do it. Number one. The second thing is, if you have adequate supports around you, if you have other kind of mechanisms that take care of it, then that in isolation is not a problem. So I think when we talk about making the rules and the frameworks, we need to talk about balancing these things. And I think more democratic, I don't think it's possible for the NLT, apart perhaps from working hours and a few guidelines like that. I think it's for us to be a little bit more democratic with our staff, have less of a hierarchical system, take their opinions on board. So I believe that the residents should kind of sit together and say, what is the best way to kind of deal with it? Very often,
Ma'am, I think his question also had to do with while the NEET focuses exclusively on just the knowledge, do you think that a dimension of the ability to take on a job like this should be brought into the screening of a graduate when he becomes a junior resident? I mean, to allow him to take this. Is that right? That's what his question is.
I think that would be lovely to do, but I can see a lot of practical difficulties within our systems are already so complex. And I think another dimension. But I think helping people to make those decisions, to decide where their aptitudes lie, that I think is a very, very useful thing. I mean, for example, Pratima was talking about violence. One of the reasons why a lot of young people don't want to take emergency medicine or anything that involves casualty duty is because they're scared of violence. I think that's terrible. I think we need to inspire confidence in people to be able to handle those situations and support them so that they don't have to get into those situations.
Sure.
And I think those are
Thank you, ma'am.
It's not a working university. They are opted or not, somehow they are going to connect the subject.
So thank you. Thank you for your question. And yes, while like ma'am said, it's desirable, but how feasible it is the question of bringing in some other dimension to assessment. We have two lined up. One is Dr. Anita and one is Dr. Nitin. So Anita, yes.
I come from a legal department. So a lot of times we have PGs who are coming in due to, circumstance, not because of choice. And then we have very glaring, differences between the academic performances of the PGs. And we see the one who's not so very, they're not happy in the department, they're not good at the subject, and then they go into a kind of shell and so-called depression, and they are not too very open to the idea of seeing a counselor. So in our situation as faculty, senior faculty, What kind of help can we offer to these kind of students?
I constantly have that problem in psychiatry because, I work in a national institute. And some people come there completely out of passion, but there's a large number of people who come because it's an opportunity to work in an institution, the salary is good, etc. So one of the strategies is really to talk to them in the beginning. Now, sometimes you also cannot make decisions about a discipline until you really get to know that discipline. The tragedy is now, you don't have that time to really make that decision because of the pay of energies. And that, I think, is another problem which makes people very unhappy staying on. So I, for example, when I got into psychiatry, said, the good discipline, I don't know anything about. I said, I'm going to give it 3 months. If it doesn't work for me, I have the luxury of being able to make that choice, which many people may not because of financial reasons. But I think having an opportunity, to discuss why you're taking a particular discipline, where your strengths lie. So for a little bit of a chance to exit without feeling that you're a failure. I think both these things are practically really.
Wonderful. Thank you, ma'am. We have a question from Nitin, and the organizers have permitted one more after that. So if somebody has a question, raise your hand. I'll identify you and we'll keep you lined up after Dr. Nitin. Yes, Nitin, go ahead.
So, two very quick points. Just a follow-up of what Dr. Malikarjun was saying and what Pratima ma'am was saying. Over the last 1 week, I received about 60-65 phone calls from students across the state as part of what to choose for PG as such. And most of the thing, and we have experienced that in the medicine department also, is they took it without knowing what it is. So one suggestion that I would like to make to the team and to people is that at the national level, if they can represent that after the counseling, if there is a 1 month window period where they actually work in the department, and like you were saying, then make the final choice of whether continuing or not, and keep the second round of counseling after 1 month. So that all this problem, which is most of the time it happens in the first 3 months, is because they took up a subject without knowing it, without knowing the harsh realities which come with it, and hence the thing. So really, it includes represented by the deans of NIMA and St. John's and prominent personality can say, let the second counseling happen after that 1 month window period. And the second quick point is, most people in undergraduate in St. John's are involved in a lot of cultural and sports activities. But the moment they enter postgraduate, all that comes down to this. And while most departments encourage postgraduates to attend research conferences and presentations, I feel both from the undergraduate student committee side to schedule these cultural events and sports events, which is convenient for postgraduates to attend and also from the department. When a postgraduate first enters, most of the time the question is, oh, why did you choose this subject? How are you interested? But very few actually ask, what are your other hobbies? How can we do to keep those hobbies running? I think these two must be taken forward.
Okay, so Nitin has given us 2 insights, but both quite valuable ones, though we did say restrict yourself to a question, but they were valuable insights. Thank you, Nitin. Johnson, last question is from Dr. Johnson.
More than a question, it's answer for Dr. Nitin. I think most of our MBBS graduates have already gone through internship. I think it's going to be a hell if again they have to go through 1 month of training. My suggestion is, wherever they are posted, they give you a heart to it, and whichever subject you are interested in, I think you should put in effort to learn from that. And again, getting focused 1 month, I think it's not practical. My other question is about slow learners. Like, I think every department we are faced with issue, and I think it's very important to handle that. Okay. I think we have also burned up in this many times, but we have learned from that, and very conducive environment, faculty being very supportive, and mentors making an effort, extra effort to help them. I think that will really lead them to better doctors or consultants.
Okay.
So just my suggestion.
Thank you, Johnson. I don't think the first point that he made was to extend the course by a month. I think the first month of the course itself should be used, is what he said. But never mind, that is something both of you can discuss over a cup of tea. Right. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, yes, Dr. Ashlesha wishes to say a word. Yes, ma'am.
Sorry to delay your tea by a few more minutes. I just wanted to add that, since we're talking about well-being and the dilemma that we are stuck in, I think what is highlighted by many of the questions is, when as a doctor, we are in a situation where we are facing violence, we're facing a patient that we can't afford to pay. The difficulty lies with what has probably come as a cultural thing. We are supposed to serve no matter what. And that dilemma is something that is very hard for doctors to deal with. And like Dr. Ratnam said, if the seniors are able to help them through, that can be very helpful. This aptitude test is a very interesting thing because I face that as a question when others who come and many people say, oh, there should be a test for parents before they become parents. Not everyone should be allowed to become parents. How are we going to ever decide that, right? I mean, I know that we can see many can't. But what we can do, I think what happens is doctors, at least in our generation, used to know only one thing. Like if I stop being a doctor, I don't know what else I can do. And so there's a lot of focus and energy that has gone in a very small niche area of our life. And that's why they are at a loss when they can't get a seat, they don't know what else they can do. So if there is a focus in other areas of their well-being, like sports or other things, they may be able to broaden their horizon and think beyond this one subject, beyond if I don't get this PG, what am I going to do? And that I think is also starting back at the wellness space.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Akhlesha. In fact, that echoes sentiments of what a lot of us feel. Nitin actually posed the question or made the observation, but I also personally agree that there is something else that you do and bring that out as well and enjoy what you do. With that, ladies and gentlemen, let's have a round of applause for these fine panelists, Dr. Pratima Murthy, Dr. Shruti, Dr. Ratnamala, Dr. Akhlesha, and Dr. George D'Souza. Thank you very much for answering these questions and setting the ball rolling on what promises to be a year of PG well-being. From my side, thank you very much.
Right, Dr. Kishore Rao from JSS, who is a psychiatrist, and we like to know my own class to the panelists. Dr. George. Dr. George,
Pleasure. In our institution. Pleasure.
So much nice to see you again.
And Dr. Shruti,
Was pleasure looking to you. Very practical.
thank you, Dr. Kishore. We request Dr. Dean, Dr. George D'Souza to say a few words of gratitude. And with that, we end our program.
Good evening and thank you all for coming here. I must place on record the effort put by Dennis and Swas to put this together. I know all the activity that has gone behind it. I think it's nearly a year, if I'm not mistaken, that this whole exercise has taken multiple meetings, workshops, etc. It's a great effort that has been done. And I hope that this will go a long way in helping our resident works. I wanted to say something about wellness. I think wellness is something that you look for. Toolkit will not help. The toolkit will only facilitate it. If you don't look for it, it's not going to come to you. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We conclude the program. I request all the authors to stay back for photograph and rest can join for time. So there are 4 stalls outside. The slide displays the names of the stall. It's for authors, HOD, faculty, and PG. Please collect your copies from the staff. It's outside this auditorium. Authors, please join us here for the picture. And rest, please join for ID.
Photograph is here, no? Outside, outside. Group.
Which one, sir?
All the authors to come. All the authors, if you could come to the site and take a picture. So all the authors, if you come, the night if you could join us as well.
Future 200.
Madam Dr. Manobari, Dr. Nandini, for a big.
Government is wanting. You know that should not be right. Now
Look for the. No, you take their picture, we take later, you come and take. You turn this. You have done nicely. Come here. Okay. So he is the next two. We'll come with this. Yeah. Take more.
Wow, it's a big group. Wow.
Then. Join us with picture.
Yeah. I dare not jump off. I'd love to, but.
okay, good.
Generation.
Okay, good. Okay, okay. Sir, back shed little more. Back straw. Okay. Good. Okay. This second row also like okay, good. Yeah. Okay, everything okay. Space is very low. Okay. Yeah. One more. Ah, that's it. Yeah. Whatever. Come. You know, get number 4. Then when you come, then that time you can deliver it to me. So no problem. My office till 6. I have work. Okay.